Welcome to Legal Riffs with the law offices of Jason L. Wilson. Let's talk about disability lawyers and law firms who advertise that they will fight for your disability benefits. I practice Social Security disability law in Central North Carolina in the Greensboro area. I do the full range of work in this area of the law. I help people file new disability applications. I represent people at disability hearings. I even take disability cases to federal court when necessary. Now, there are some big personal injury law firms in this part of the state that advertise heavily on local TV stations, and they advertise a lot for Social Security disability cases. I was watching one of these ads the other day, and the lawyer in that ad looked into the camera and he said, "We'll fight for your disability benefits." Now, when I heard that, I kind of chuckled to myself because I'm familiar with how these big firms operate when they handle disability cases. So if they say that they'll fight for your disability benefits, are they telling you the truth? To answer that question, let's take a quick look at the internal review process that Social Security has to evaluate disability claims. There's basically a four-stage process. So at the first stage, if you have filed a disability application, Social Security does a medical review. It looks at the medical records, your medical records, and then it will issue a decision letter. It will either approve your disability claim or deny it. It's not unusual to be denied because Social Security denies a pretty big percentage of initial disability applications. If that happens, you move to stage number two. Stage number two is what Social Security calls a reconsideration review. If you have any new medical records, they'll look at those along with the previous records, and once they complete that review, they issue a second decision. So they're basically doing it over again. We're taking a second look at your claim, but issuing a second decision. Unfortunately, they typically deny the claim a second time. Right now, they usually deny about around 90% of claims at the reconsideration level. So if that happens, you move to stage number three. Stage number three is the most important stage. It's a disability hearing with a Social Security judge called an administrative law judge. So when you have a disability hearing, you have a better chance of getting approved, but you have no guarantee of getting approved. The different ALJs have different approval and denial rates, and some of them deny a large percentage of claims. So there's always a chance that your disability claim may be denied, even if you have a good case. If that happens, then you move to stage number four, and that's called Appeals Council Review. Social Security has a review board that it calls the Appeals Council, and it has the authority to review the decisions of the ALJs. You can ask the Appeals Council to review the ALJ's unfavorable decision, but the Appeals Council doesn't have to do that. It has authority to determine whether or not it will review the decision. And it is very common for the Appeals Council to decline to review the ALJ's decision. If that happens, that's the end of the internal review process for Social Security. And that basically makes the ALJ's unfavorable decision the final decision of Social Security on your disability claim. Now, these big personal injury law firms that I was talking about, they represent clients throughout that four-stage process, internal process, within the Social Security Administration. But here's the thing, there's no fighting going on during this internal process. So if I'm filing a disability application, if I'm helping a client to file a disability application, I'm just helping the client to give information to Social Security about the client's medical history and work history and stuff like that. Same thing on the reconsideration review. Now at the disability hearing is a legal proceeding with a judge, so it's more formal, but there's no fighting going on at this legal proceeding. And the reason for that is because this is what Social Security calls a non-adversarial proceeding. Now that means that there's no lawyer on the other side of the case arguing against you. So when you have a disability hearing, the only lawyer at that hearing is your lawyer. There's no Social Security lawyer on the other side arguing that your claim should be denied. Now, when I go to a disability hearing, the only people typically at that hearing are the client, the lawyer, and the ALJ. And the only person at that hearing that I could potentially get into an argument or a fight with would be the ALJ, which I'm not going to do because I can't win that fight. The ALJ has all the authority. The ALJ has the authority to approve the claim or deny the claim. My job as a lawyer at a disability hearing is basically to do two things. Number one, I help the judge by supplying information and evidence to the judge. So I'm trying to give the judge the information and evidence necessary to evaluate the case. The second thing that I do at a disability hearing is I try to persuade the judge as to why this disability claim should be approved. Why should this client be approved for benefits under the Social Security regulations? Now, I can't do either of those things if I'm getting into a fight or an argument with the ALJ. If I do that, I'm taking the ALJ's focus away from the evidence and the issues of the case, and I'm putting the ALJ's focus on a dispute between me and the judge. And that's just a losing fight, and it's something that I don't do, and it's something that no lawyer should do because it will lose the case. So there's no fighting, really. There's no fight that goes on at any stage of this internal Social Security review process. Now, there is another stage, potentially, to a disability case. So even if you've been denied by an ALJ, the Appeals Council has declined to review the case, you still have the right to a further appeal. But now the case needs to move into federal court. And if that happens, you're filing a lawsuit in federal court against the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. So this takes the case outside of Social Security and moves it into the federal court system. And this changes the entire character of a case because now it's a lawsuit. Now it becomes an adversarial process because Social Security is going to be represented in this lawsuit on the other side by a lawyer from its Office of General Counsel. So now you have a lawyer representing you, Social Security has a lawyer on the other side, and the two lawyers are now battling it out in front of the federal court. And it's a fight, okay? And the issue is whether or not the ALJ, when that ALJ denied your disability claim, did that ALJ commit an error of law in the hearing decision? So the role of the federal court is basically to enforce the law against Social Security. So the federal court gets to review the decision of the ALJ and the evidence in the case, and it looks at the Social Security rules and regulations, and it gets to decide, did this ALJ follow the rules and the regulations, which are the law, when that ALJ denied your disability claim? So this is a very important review, and this is the only stage where you get to go to an outside authority to ask that authority, which is the court, to enforce the rules against Social Security. And that's the fight between the two lawyers in the case. And that's the only stage of a disability case where it turns into a fight. But here's the thing. Those big personal injury law firms that I'm talking about in this video, guess what is the one thing that those big law firms do not do in disability cases? Well, these big firms do not file Social Security disability cases in federal court. Now, I know this for a fact because I have access to the federal court filing system. So I can see all of the Social Security disability cases that are filed in the federal courts in North Carolina. And I can see the names of the lawyers that file those cases. And none of the lawyers that file disability cases in the federal courts in North Carolina work for any of these big personal injury law firms that I'm talking about. So those big firms that advertise that they'll fight for your disability benefits, they don't file cases in federal court. They don't take disability cases to the only stage of a disability case that involves an actual fight. So when it comes to trying to enforce the law and to enforce the rules and regulations against Social Security, those big firms don't do that. If they lose your disability case at a hearing with an ALJ and the appeals council doesn't review the case, they're going to drop out of the case. I mean, that's what they do. They just drop out of the case, and then you have to hope that you can find another lawyer that might be able to help you. Now, the reality is there aren't that many of these big personal injury firms, but there are a lot of smaller law firms and solo practitioners like me, lawyers that have their own law practice. There's a lot of these other lawyers around that handle disability cases, but most of them also do not file Social Security disability cases in federal court. Okay? So they're not fighting for their clients' disability benefits either, because they're not going to the one authority that has the ability to enforce the rules against Social Security. The reason I'm telling you this in this video is because I want you to understand that this is the reality of the situation. When you're thinking about hiring a lawyer to help you with a disability case, that's one of the very important things that you need to be thinking about. Does this law firm or does this lawyer file Social Security cases in federal court? I do. Now, I've been practicing Social Security disability law since 2003. And over the course of my career, I have sued the Social Security Administration hundreds and hundreds of times to help my clients who were unfairly denied their disability benefits by Social Security ALJs. So I'm willing to fight for my clients' rights by taking their cases to the federal courts to try to get the courts to enforce the rules against Social Security.